Hello, we hope you enjoyed session one with Lad and Judy as they talked about parenting and skills that can help you be the best parent that God's intended you to be. Another part of dedicating your journey is making sure that you keep your marriage a priority. As your parents, it's important that you also take care of your marriage. Vonda and I have been married over 21 years, and it's a priority for us, except for the first 6 years we've been parents. And so we've had to make this journey together, keeping our marriage a priority. And one of the things that's so important, perhaps primary to keeping a marriage a priority, is communication. Communication is the important thing that keeps you in connection, making sure that you're able to understand how each other think, understanding that you're making sure that each of you are clear in the way that you're expressing your thoughts and emotions, and making sure you're just up to date in how each of you are feeling. And so it's important that there's a few rules that you know, and rules may be taken lightly, but we want to make sure that you are aware of the power of words, both in positive and negative. So a few rules to follow. One is that you need to use more I statements than you statements. For instance, I'm going to talk to Vonda K, and if we have a concern, I'm going to talk about my concern, not saying you do this or you do that. Another thing that goes right along with that are two statements to avoid at all cost, and those are you always and you never. Those statements are always exaggerations, and so for instance, if I said, Vonda K, you always, whatever it would be, whether it be an annoyance or a habit, or if you never, and something I expect her to do, that would not be a good way to communicate. And so that's something that's very important to us. Along the journey as you communicate, it's so important that you also extend grace and forgiveness. I know throughout our years that there's been several things that I wish I could take back, statements that I've said that didn't add anything of positive note to our marriage. And so listening to each other and making sure that you say, you're sorry is so important. A great tool to help you in your marriage is understanding each other. And one of the ways that you understand each other is through understanding what your languages are. Gary Chapman's written a book called The 5 Love Languages. And this is a great resource for you to think about how you connect as a couple. And so Vonda and I are going to talk about our love languages, but all of them, but those that we relate to most, we can share some insight on those. And the first one is words of affirmation. Words of affirmation obviously are those words that affirm, the words that build each other up. One of the things that's so important, the Bible talks about husbands loving their wives and wives respecting their husbands. And one of the great ways in which we both do that is through words. For me, words of affirmation are very important. I know that I can have a great day and at work and other activities and come home and Vonda K affirms me and I can feel great. And the opposite can be the case as well, where negative words can impact me in a very personal way. So one of the things that is important to me is words of affirmation. We're going to, as I said, talk about more gifts and more languages, love languages, but I wanted to make sure, as we do, to let you know that it's important that you will often make the assumption, as I have, if we're not careful, that my love language is Vonda K's love language. So sometimes we will try to love the person the way we want to be loved, and while that isn't necessarily negative, it's not good to assume that what you consider very important is what your spouse considers important.
So another of the love languages is quality time. And one way that we have done this throughout our marriage is being sure to schedule dates. We've always done a monthly date. If you can do them more regularly, that's great. But it's important to calendar those dates, otherwise it may not happen. One thing that we've also tried to do with those dates is to be creative. And it's okay to use resources. Mark is definitely more creative than I am, and he comes up with his own things a lot of times, but I need a little bit more help with creativity. So one resource is Dating Divas. I've really enjoyed that website, and they have a lot of creative ideas. Another thing that we do when we go out on dates is to use conversation starter cards, and there's some good ones out there. We really like this one, 88 great conversation starters for husbands and wives. And then all of the chat pack cards, this one's very well used, but just look up chat pack and they have so many different boxes. But that will help you as you go out on your dates and you want to talk about more than the kids and your work, and it's just a great way to connect. But the quality time is very important to me and to both of us. We also like to try to do creative things like going on a hike, inexpensive things, skiing in the winter, and then there's things like going to dinner and movie and those kind of things. So we like to vary it up. We also feel like it's important to get away for a weekend or even a week. I think those times of connection are important away from the kids. So those are some ways that we have spent quality time together.
Another gift, or actually a language that Chapman uses, is the actual language of gifts, the gift giving and receiving. For Vonda and myself, actually, this is not one of the higher priority gifts. If we were to make sure that one person communicated on the value of that, I would consider that more valuable than Vonda, but actually it's not a very high one for either one of us. Gift giving can be your language, and that can be, again, the giving or the receiving. And so if you're a gift giver, continue to do that, and that can be a great way of expressing your love. Also be aware that your spouse may not be one who needs as many gifts. And so I think it's important to communicate throughout those times of your marriage, very honestly with each other, and talk about what gifts are valuable, not as far as how much money they cost, but what are significant. What are the gifts that are important to receive? What don't matter as much to you? So for instance, there are people that want to celebrate every holiday that's on the calendar. For other people, they may say Valentine's Day isn't all that significant for us, and birthdays and Christmas are the only ones. So make sure this is something that's very an honest conversation you have about gift giving. I think it is very important, whether it be on a regular basis or just a rare time, that you do show your spouse that they're significant by being generous. And we've talked about that can be through words and through time, but also it can be just by buying something of value, of significance. And that can be something that reminds you of your early days of dating, or your spouse may like reading and you buy them a good book, or as Vonda said, sometimes those gifts can come in the form very similar to quality time, as in I'm going to pay for us to go have a getaway weekend, and for us here in Alaska that can be Alaska, that can be somewhere around town, but just making sure that you're not cheap when it comes to your marriage, that you are able to use the money that God's given you in a wise way, and also be able to, in the words of her before, buy memories. Don't be afraid to buy memories. Invest in those opportunities where you'll build those times, and your kids will appreciate this. The stronger your marriage, the more your kids are going to appreciate that example for the future.
Acts of service is one of my highest love languages, and it's probably Mark's lowest. So it seems like it works out that way sometimes. So I appreciate when Mark does things for me around the house, just helping where needed. I think earlier in our marriage, that was one of our first major conflicts, was who's going to do what and with the chores. We kind of decided on that early on, but I think later in our marriage it's not necessarily a divided line. I think that we just help each other out where we see it's needed. I think the random acts of kindness philosophy is a good one, and just helping each other out and doing what we need to make it work.
Well, as she mentioned early in our marriage, that was one of the things we had to figure out. It depends on your background, what it was like in the home in which you grew up, what your mom did, what your dad did, were there 2 full-time jobs. And so you bring into your marriage your experiences before, so that's important to talk about. Another thing we experienced about 6 years into our marriage, but a little before that with pregnancy as well, is the energy level and the way in which you can accomplish things when you're pregnant or right after you have a baby. We had adjustment time there as well. Things where Vonda K was doing certain tasks, acts of service, and then in my mind I thought, well, she's going to continue to do these things, but she didn't have the energy, or Kate had lots of energy, and so she was taking care of our daughter, and so we had to make adjustments again. So there'll be different times in life where you're going to have to make adjustments, and make sure that you don't say that, well, we figured it out now, we never have to figure out that thing again. Be able to do those acts of service. And as Vonda K said, that's not a priority for me necessarily as far as receiving acts of service, but I can't read that and saying, well, it's not important to someone else. So I know that Vonda K's love language, most likely her highest love language, is acts of service. Another love language is that of personal touch. There are various degrees in which people desire touch, and touch can be the type of touch that is the hand holding, the putting arms around each other, that making sure that you just physically are there, that you're present, that people enjoy a reminder. It can also be sexual touch. So we talk about the value of sexual touch and intimacy, which doesn't involve sexuality. For us, we find out that is obviously a need for both of us, but this is one of my higher love languages, and that sometimes is stereotypically male, but that doesn't necessarily play out in all marriages. Different degrees on how valuable the love language of touch is. That being said, I would like to say that it is very important that you, as husbands and as wives, take care of each other physically. Make sure that there's that intimacy, again, whether from holding hands or sex with each other, that time where you're able to say, you're important to me. That physical expression of love is important. Again, there's adjustments. Some of you may be going through this right now. You've had a baby, trying to figure out physically the energy level. What's it like to have intimate relationships now that we have a child crying in the next bedroom? Another hindrance to this also can be going back to quality time. We cannot stress enough the value of, as soon as the child's old enough, to be able to find someone who can watch your child, to have babysitters. I know some parents, we didn't necessarily struggle with this, but some parents really struggle, even as a child gets older and older, to be away from that child. And that can often cause conflict, where one parent does not want to leave the child ever with a babysitter or with a grandparent or something. And that can cause friction. So if that's a struggle for you, find somebody you trust, find somebody you know will take care of your child, and go out on a date with your spouse. Vonda K said earlier about quality time that you need to schedule those times. Also with intimacy, make sure that you have this open discussion about your levels of need sexually in your marriage, and how important it is to make sure that that is a need that is met. I know that's a conversation Vonda K and I've had throughout our 21 plus years of marriage in our understanding of the love language of touch.
If you struggle with your desire level as a woman, or the needs that a man has for sex, I do recommend the book Intimate Issues. It really helped me to just know that basic need is very important to a man, but it's also important to both of us. And so I just wanted to recommend that book.
And anything you can do, again, those resources out there, whether that be a conversation with your doctor or reading intimate issues, it's an important issue. And so with all of these love languages, make sure that you talk to your spouse. If you haven't read the book, read the book, get to know each other. And don't ever be afraid to ask for help, to talk to others about ways in which they find dating, find ways in which people are able to meet the needs of each other. Another one that ties in particularly to the area of touch, but also all the love languages, is the area of your physical fitness. There's all different areas, different levels of physical fitness and the way in which you find that a priority. But bottom line to that is the healthier you feel, the healthier your marriage is going to be. Because if you're tired, if you're fatigued, if you have an unhealthy lifestyle, that's going to impact your marriage. It's going to impact your parenting. It's also going to set an example for your kids, whether it be positive or negative. And so it can be looking into your eating habits, to your exercise level, making sure that's something that you monitor and make a priority in your marriage. We don't always, but we talk about this, and I'm able to compliment my wife after 21 years of marriage to say, thank you for taking care of your body, and you look good, and that's something that's important. So if that's something that you struggle with, make sure it's something you at least consider, something you analyze, and make sure you find that an issue that you talk about as a couple.
It's also important, kind of switching gears here, to share your faith in your marriage and to pray for each other, with each other. Also to share, whether you read scripture together or just share what you've read. That's what Mark and I do a lot of times. And I like to do it as a family as well. When God has really worked in my life and is teaching me something, to share that not only with your spouse but with your kids as well. So that is another important thing to keep connected to God and the two of us.
And the way that plays out over your marriage is the closer I am in my relationship to God, and the closer Vonda K is in her relationship with God, the closer we are together. Because that is the most important connection we have is our relationship with our Creator, our relationship to God through His Son Jesus Christ. And if I'm close to my God, and she's close as well, then our marriage is stronger, and there's not that conflict regarding that most important relationship, that being our relationship with God. One of the ways that you can take all of this information and look upon your marriage and say, how are we doing with this, is some self-evaluation, some self-examination that you do personally and you share with your spouse. And one of the great tools for that is by looking at Paul's writing to the church in Corinth in his first letter, 1 Corinthians. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul writes this wonderful word about love. What are the attributes of love? What are the qualities of love? The context of that passage is his word to the church on how the church should focus not on those super religious opportunities or the super, quote, spiritual opportunities, as important as those are, but if we love, everything else is going to be richer and more beautiful within the church. We take that example also into marriage. And so after he talks about all these impressive things people can do, he goes on to say, but now I want to show you the most excellent thing. He talks about love being patient and love being kind and not envying and not boasting, not being rude. And I think another key one is not keeping a record of wrongs. And if you've been married for a brief time or for a long time, that's can often be a temptation, is keeping a record of wrongs. We sometimes keep those as ammunition in case we need them later, to be able to say, like we said earlier, I'm going to say you always or you never, and you can pull out those things that your spouse has done in the past that harmed you or frustrated you. And so it's so important we don't keep record of those wrongs. And so if you can read 1 Corinthians 13 and look at each of those words and then grade yourself, you can do a scale of 1 to 10. You can grade yourself letter-wise, A through F. How are you doing? Evaluate yourself. Are you patient? Are you kind? Are you envious? Are you boastful? Are you proud? Are you rude? And then each spouse does that, and then you come together in a safe environment, in a play fair opportunity, and just have these conversations. Let me be clear here, don't confuse date time and discussion, evaluation of your marriage time. Those need to be completely separate opportunities, because you can get very passionate in two ways. There can be passionate in a positive passion, that excitement, that joy, even that sexual passion. But there's also the passion that come about when you're passionate about your point, passionate about a struggle, passionate about your communication, and you want to keep those separate. So in other words, you don't want to spend a date night talking about the struggles you've had in your marriage. You don't want to spend a date night talking about how your spouse lacks patience or kindness, or how you lack that. And so can't emphasize enough to keep those things separate.
And I'll add here that I think that it does need to be a self-evaluation and not evaluating your spouse, and just thinking through each of those. What are areas that I need to work on? Which of these, and maybe just pick one or two, and then what are the ones that I feel like I'm doing pretty well with, and communicating that, I think, is a good thing.
And one of the things that helps in this, going back full circle in some ways, is communication. That's how we started this session. I want to come back to that. One of the things that you need to do is not dwell on the idea that your spouse knows what you're thinking. Make sure you're expressive with your spouse. So tell your spouse when you're attracted to them. Tell your spouse, say the words, I love you. Don't assume they know that. They probably do know that, hope they do, but express that. Same with your children. Make sure you tell your children you love them. Have that open conversation. One of the greatest gifts that you can give your children is a healthy marriage. I want to say that again. One of the greatest gifts you can give your children is a healthy marriage. That will impact them right now. It'll impact them in the future. It's going to impact them in their idea of marriage. Is marriage a good thing? Is marriage a healthy thing? What does it look like to model a good marriage? And that's a priority to us. I'm thankful that Vonda Kay and I share that, the understanding of the importance of that. And so that's something that we want to pass on to you, that keeping marriage a priority is really going to be a gift, not only to you as a couple, but also to your family.